What's going on, y'all? My name is Brandon Stein. I'm the owner and founder of SteinLaw. We are a multi-state law firm in business since 2013, and we've done hundreds of millions of dollars of recovery for our clients. And today, what I want to speak to y'all about is numbers, all right? And in particular, are the financial numbers and why it's so important. If you're a business owner, whether you're a business of one or a business of 100, you have to know your numbers. And I think from a typical standpoint, doctors, lawyers, maybe other professionals, they're not taught the business of law or the business of medicine. They're taught how to be a great doctor. They're taught the medicine. They're taught how to be a great lawyer. They're taught the law, but you're not really taught the business side of things, which I get. I mean, when you're looking at schooling, whether it's med school or law school, it doesn't matter. You're not taught the business of how to run a practice. It's just not part of the curriculum. The curriculum is largely focused on passing your medical boards or passing the bar exam so you could be a lawyer and practice law. But that doesn't help you in the business of law. Now, there are many aspects to running a business. It's very difficult in a variety of ways. But one way that you can really make sure that you stay ahead is knowing your numbers and have certain KPIs or key performance indicators to have a full understanding of whether or not your business is succeeding and thriving or on the precipice of failure. Or what's most important is it's a way to identify problems on the horizon. It's if you're a meteorologist and you're tracking a storm, it's understanding when that storm is forming, where it is, when it's going to hit the shore, and making sure that you are prepared when it hits so that you're not scrambling to shutter up your windows right as the hurricane hits the shore. You see the hurricane days out, so you have plenty of time to plan. And when we're talking about numbers, there's a projection, I believe, of financials that you need to have at the tip of your tongue. So if I were to ask you, hey, what's the financial health of your company? You could run through these numbers and really give me or anyone a good understanding of how prosperous your company is or how in dire straits your company may be from a financial standpoint. Now, there's a progression, all right? So to start, I want to talk about gross profit, all right? So understanding your gross profit numbers are super important. Now, gross profit is just simply a calculation, all right? It's your total revenue minus your cost of goods sold, and that equals gross profit. Now, if you're in the professional business and you're in the service industry where you're not selling goods such as toys or food or some other product that you inventory, when you're selling professional services and it's actually people or humans that have to do that work so that you could generate your revenue, it's a little bit more not complex, but a little bit more of a different analysis when you're calculating gross profit. So if you run a law firm, let's say, like I do, the way I calculate my gross profit is I look at my total revenue or gross revenue and I deduct cost of goods sold. But in my industry, just like any service industry, I don't have goods that I'm selling that cost a certain amount. For instance, if you're a supermarket owner and you sell coffee, all right, and you sell that product for $10 and that product costs you $5 to put on the shelf, your gross profit is $5. Simple as that. But in the service industry, it's a little different. So cost of goods sold is actually the cost of the personnel needed to generate that revenue. Let me say that again because it's very important. Gross profit in a business where you have professional services is your gross revenue minus the cost it costs the company to retain those employees that are necessary to generate that revenue. So if you're a law firm and you generate $1 million in business a year, just to keep the numbers easy, the employees that you need to generate that revenue may be lawyers, maybe paralegals, maybe some administrative or support staff, reception staff, what have you, basic personnel that are needed to move those cases along. Let's say for those $1 million, it costs you $400,000 a year. All right, $400,000 a year in payroll to generate that $1 million. So when we're talking cost of goods sold, that's $400,000 in the service industry. All right. So when you take the $1 million and you take away the $400,000, your gross profit is $600,000. This is a simple calculation. Just go to your payroll company and say, hey, here are the employees. What do these employees cost me a year? How much do these employees generate for me a year? Meaning my business does $1 million. These employees cost me $400,000 a year. My gross profit is $600,000. All right. And then from there, what you want to get to is gross profit margin. All right. Because the gross profit margin really tells the story of productivity. All right. If you have a very low gross profit, a very low gross profit margin, that means in the professional service industry, it means your cost of goods are too high and you're not producing enough revenue based upon what you're paying for those cost of goods or for that staff. So in my industry, in the professional service industry, I would argue, and this is just me, you may have a different view, other people may have a different view, but I believe your gross profit margin must be upwards of 70% plus. All right. If you're in the 80% plus range, you're doing really well. Minimum has to be, you have to be at 70%. So what does that mean? Gross profit margin is the calculation of your gross profit divided by gross revenue or total revenue. All right. So to use my example before, where I have $1 million in total revenue and I have $400,000 in cost of goods sold or the payroll, right? For my staff, my gross profit is $600,000. We may think that that's good. Okay, great, cool. I'm making $600,000 and it's only costing me $400,000 out of my pocket and they're generating $1 million. Great. To calculate the gross profit margin off that, you take that $600,000 and you divide it by $1 million. What do you get? 60%. So at that calculation, at that rate, when you're paying your staff $400,000 and they're producing $1 million, your gross profit margin is 60%. You may sit and think that's great. Oh, that's cool, great. But here's the problem with that. The business does not only run on your cost of goods sold or on that staff. There are other components to the business, other costs associated with the business that dilutes your profit. What do I mean by that? You have rent, you have marketing, you have advertising, you have office supplies, you have IT. The list goes on. All right. Other miscellaneous, insurance, licenses, whatever it may be, management software, any other CRM that you use, it doesn't matter. That is in addition to the cost of goods sold. So all those expenses further water down your $600,000 gross profit. So then the next level down, all right, that you want to look to is I need to know what is my net profit. Real quick, guys, if you feel like your cases are not moving as fast as they should and you're the owner or you manage an inventory of cases in a personal injury law firm, then I think and a partnership with us may be a good opportunity if you're looking to grow your business. And I'm talking about a partnership as it relates to either some most or all of your cases. And we offer very aggressive co-counsel fee splits, and we take the operational overhead off of your plate. We take the litigation overhead off of your plate, and you get the best bang for your buck and the best return on your investment. So if you think this is a good opportunity, or at least an opportunity that's worth exploring, visit www.steinlaw.com/partnership, input your information there, and set up a call with me, Brandon Stein, and I'm looking forward to speaking with you, and we could see how we can help. All right. So we have gross profit, and gross profit's fairly simple. It's total revenue minus cost of goods sold, or the staff that you pay to get that revenue. And then you have a bottom line number of gross profit. But then you have to get to net profit. All right, net revenue is actually what you take home in your pocket. That's the important number. Of course, anyone who's evaluating a business naturally is going to go all the way to the bottom of the funnel and say, okay, how much are you making and how much are you taking home? So net profit is a simple calculation, all right? It's your total revenue minus all the expenses, everything, not just your cost of goods sold or your COGS, but it's all the other expenses, rent, advertising, IT, computers, supplies, whatever, plus the payroll or the cost of goods sold. That's your total expenses. So if the rest of your total expenses, to use my example of $1 million of total revenue, $400,000 of cost of goods sold or the payroll, let's say, then you have $600 to play with. But what if the rent and the rest of your the rest of your expenses takes you up to $500,000 in a yearly basis? All right, that's not unreasonable for a business running at $1 million gross revenue. Not unreasonable. So let's say it's $500,000 for rent, advertising, what have you. So that $500,000 further waters down the total number. So you have your $1 million, then you take away the 400, you're down to 600,000. But then you have $500,000, and now you're only down to $100,000 of net profit. So that $1 million, even though it may seem good and viable that your $400,000 of cost of goods sold seems great, hey, 60%. But when you break it down, it really dilutes it further when you take out all those other expenses. So we did gross profit margin. Net profit margin is super important because that's the safety net that you have year over year or quarter over quarter for your business if things happen. Because what if revenues are down? What if bonuses come and you have to pay out bonuses? What if rent goes up? What if advertising changes and the market changes and all of a sudden your advertising goes up? You need to have a buffer. You absolutely need that buffer. So net profit margin shows you the buffer that you have. So using this example, when we have $100,000 of net profit, how do we get net profit margin? Net profit margin is simple. It's your net profit divided by your total revenue. And that's net profit margin. Okay? So the 100,000 is now divided by $1 million. That's 10%. So the 60% gross profit, when you take all the other expenses, it cuts it down by another 50 points down to only 10% profit margin. And I'll tell you, if you're running a business, you want to be at the absolute minimum, especially in the service industry, at the absolute minimum of 20 to 30% net profit margin, because you need to account for shortfalls. You need to account for the natural peaks and valleys of any business. So if you're running at a 10% net profit margin, you're running at extremely, extremely slim margins. So not only does it put your business at risk for future inflation fluctuations as it relates to expenses, but if you're trying to go and get loans or get capital contributions from outside investors or outside people, banks, they're going to look at those numbers and they're going to be very concerned because there's a very, very small margin for error when you're carrying that type of low gross profit. All right. And which ultimately backs out to low net profit. So what's a good analysis? What do you want to look at? All right. So you want to look at the gross profit margin. And remember, I said the gross profit margin, which is total revenue minus cost of goods sold, that gets your gross profit. And then gross profit margin is gross profit divided by total revenue. That percentage, that number, you want to be 70 to 80%. All right. If you're at 70 to 80%, then you want to look at your expense to total revenue ratio. All right. So if you're looking at rent, if you're looking at advertising, your big ticket items, I'm not talking little office party expenses or miscellaneous or suspense items. No. I'm talking about the big ticket items, which are typically payroll, rent, and advertising for any company. All right. So if you're looking at that and you're looking at advertising, you want to see what your expense to total revenue ratio is, or what it's projected to be. Because whatever that percentage is, that dilutes what your gross profit or ultimate net profit will be. So if we're operating under the same example where our gross profit margin is 60%, then you want to look to, okay, what's my rent for the year? If my rent for the year is $250,000, my expense to total revenue ratio is that $250,000, $250,000 divided by the $1 million that I've earned. And my rent is accounting for 25% of my total revenue. So that 25% comes right off the top of that 60% of gross profit margin. All right. So now you're all of a sudden down to 35%. And that's before you take into account any advertising, any IT, any computers, anything. So when you're doing your budgets, you want to make sure that you are so fine-tuned with what your expense to total revenue ratio is at the end of the year, but also going into the new year, what it's projected to be. Because those projections are going to drive your net profits. Because every percentage that you can save, that's an additional net profit percentage in your pocket. That's the way it works. It's simple as that. It's knowing the numbers. All right. So that's really, really important when you're analyzing your budget or your numbers for the prior year. And what it does is it identifies pitfalls or certain expense items that might be burning a hole in your company's pocket. But here's what I'll say to keep it very, very simple. All right. You could have your accountant or your CPA, assuming you have one for the business, run those numbers for you. You know, hey, what's my gross profit? What's my net profit for the prior year? Can you give me an expense to total revenue ratio for my rent? Give me an expense to total revenue ratio for my advertising. Give me an expense to total revenue ratio for my IT, because my IT is actually my third biggest administrative expense after advertising and rent. I want to know what that is. So every dollar that you can save with those expenses, the expense to total revenue ratio, that percentage is going to go down. And as you get that percentage to go down, your net revenues are going to go up because you're saving money that way. And every point matters. So it's very, very important when you're looking at your KPIs, your financial KPIs, that you analyze from the top on down and view it like a funnel. The very top end of the funnel is your total revenue or your gross revenue. As you're coming down, you're looking at what's my gross profit. And remember, that's total revenue minus cost of goods sold. And when I get my gross profit, what's my gross profit margin, which is gross profit divided by total revenue. And you want that gross profit margin to be 70 to 80%, because remember, you have all those other expenses below it that are going to start eating away at that percentage, that is thus eating away at your net profit margin. So as you continue on down, you get to your other expenses that don't necessarily directly bring in the revenue, but they are necessary to run the business, and thus they deteriorate the ultimate gross profit down. So when you take your gross profit and you deduct all those other expenses on the bottom end of that funnel, you get your net profit. And then your net profit margin is very important to see the amount of room that you have to work with, like what your safety net is moving forward. All right. If that net profit margin is below 10% or below 20%, not that there's alarm bells because you're still running a profit, but you're running a profit on very tight margins, which means very, very narrow margin for error. And the net profit margin is telling because it tells you not only what your gross profit is and how productive that is as it relates to your payroll and your staff, but it tells you when looking at your other expenses, if they're maybe bleeding you dry and you may have to cut them a little bit and start chiseling it down to see where you could gain percentage points here and there. That will put you in a better position. Understanding all your expenses puts you in a better position, but make sure you know your gross profit. Make sure you know your net profit. We'll talk to you later.